great, isn't it? And, just in the way that God kind of lines things up and ties things together. And really all that my heart is for this morning is that we would simply know him more. Is that we would be still and know who he is. That as we look at something of his word, that we would know Jesus in a deeper way. Before I introduce you to Jesus in another way, though, through his word, I want to introduce you to somebody else. So in here, this is Miles. Everyone say hi, Miles. Miles belongs to Simon. I can't claim credit for Miles. Simon saved up and bought Miles with his own money. He's quite a pricey teddy, as teddies go, because he's from Build-A-Bear. I don't know if any of you have ever been to Build-A-Bear or know kind of Build-A-Bear, but if you don't know how Build-A-Bear works, it's this amazing kind of shop that you can go into, and the shop's filled with all sorts of different teddies, of different shapes and sizes and types of animals and all of that kind of thing. And they have some of them up around the walls, but they have them as unstuffed there for you to kind of pick. And you get to create your own teddy. You choose what teddy you want. You choose the clothes that the teddy is going to wear. You can even choose if you want to put something inside the teddy that makes a sound. And then the last thing that you do is you choose the kind of heart that goes inside the teddy. So somewhere inside Miles is a little heart that has been put in there. And then you kind of help them put all the stuffing in and stitch him up, and you have your own kind of teddy that you've put together. You get to see him come to life. And it's pretty amazing, isn't it? And for someone like Simon, he loves his teddies. It's like the shop of his dreams. If we to go into Build-A-Bear, when he discovered that Build-A-Bear existed, the only thing that he wanted to do with his money was to be able to go and make himself his own teddy, which is great. And there's teddies there that'll suit pretty much anyone. There's so much choice and variety and things. And I think this kind of ability to make the choice about what it is that we want is brilliant when it comes to Build-A-Bear. The problem is that as a culture, as a society, we've kind of taken that mentality then into everything else. The truth can be whatever we want it to be. What we can believe, whatever it is that we want to believe. You can kind of pick and choose. You can kind of go into the Build-A-Bear store of life and faith and religion and pick and choose whatever it is that you find works for you. Or maybe even when it comes to simply the way that we approach what it looks like to follow Jesus, when the way that we approach the Bible, approaches his word, sometimes it can be with that kind of a mentality. The mentality of walking into Build-A-Bear and finding the bits that we like, that we're drawn to, and kind of piecing together, I'll build my version of Jesus. My version of what it looks like to follow him. And this kind of approach where anything goes, it is nothing new. We sometimes think that as a world we've kind of developed so far, and C.S. Lewis uses his little phrase, chronological snobbery, that we kind of look back in time and think we're so much more advanced than everyone else. But really this whole mentality, this way of approaching life and faith was exactly the way the world worked when the Bible was written. In the Roman Empire, when it came to faith, when it came to religion, when it came to what you believed, in most cities they were filled with temples and gods and all these different things, this huge variety that was out there, and the general approach was Build-A-Bear. You pick and choose whatever it is that works for you. And this mentality started to impact on the early church. Because really, it was the mentality that the new believers brought into the church. It's what they'd always known, the way they'd always approached things. And so this is the backdrop that helps us understand so much of the way that the New Testament is written. And particularly, it's the backdrop that helps us to understand a letter that we're going to be looking at today, which is Paul's letter to the Colossians. The believers there were approaching Jesus like Build-A-Bear, trying to make him what they wanted him to be, what they thought he should look like, and make their faith, what it looked like to follow Jesus, be what it is that they wanted it to be too. And so Paul writes to them, and his key purpose, the whole real reason why he writes this whole letter, is he simply wants to say to them, this is Jesus. This is Jesus. I want to introduce you to him. I want you to really know him. And to help them grasp who Jesus is, he writes one of the most amazing kind of passages that describes Jesus that you can find in the whole Bible. And we're just simply going to unpack it together today. We're just going to go through it line by line. It's not my normal kind of way of doing things, but that's all we're going to do today. We're just going to go through it line by line. And I don't know where you're at in terms of your faith. I don't know what it is that you kind of believe, but there is nothing more important for us than for us to settle in our hearts who Jesus is. Once we're confident about who Jesus is, it's amazing how everything else just kind of falls into place. And as a church, whatever might go on in the world around us, whatever different challenges we might face in life, we want to be people who know Jesus. We want to be people who are centered on Jesus, and we want to be people who put Jesus first in everything. So let's have a look at what Paul writes to the Colossians. If you've got a Bible with you, you might want to kind of pull it out, follow along. We're going to be starting chapter 1, verse 15, but it'll come up on the screen too. This is what Paul writes. He says this: Christ, that's Jesus, is the visible image of the invisible God. He existed before anything was created and is supreme over all creation. Now, when it comes to kind of the Build-A-Bear approach with Jesus, a lot of different people and a lot of different religions even have their own ideas of who Jesus is. And a lot of them will kind of teach that Jesus that they're happy. You can have a conversation with them about Jesus so long as you keep it at the level that Jesus was a great man, a great teacher, a great prophet. He was this great moral kind of guy, someone who is worth paying attention to. But just as in the time of the Romans, it's exactly the same for us today. What gets a reaction is when you say that Jesus is God. He's not just one teacher among many that you can have in the shop of Build-A-Bear and pick and choose from. He is the invisible God making himself known to us. And so he is supreme over all creation. Everything else is under him. And we see this again and again throughout the Bible. This isn't just a kind of a one-off statement that we're taking from Paul. We're not left really, as you read through it, with any other option than to come to this conclusion about who Jesus is. Pick a couple of them for you. Hebrews 1, verse 3. This is what it says: the Son, as Jesus, is the radiance of God's glory and the exact representation of his being. Or in John 14, this is Jesus himself, as one of the disciples comes to Jesus and says to Jesus, will you show us the Father? When are you going to show us the Father? To show them God. And this is what we read. It says, Jesus answered, verse 9, don't you know me, Philip? Even after I have been among you such a long time, anyone who has seen me has seen the Father. How can you say, show us the Father? And this is amazing, because this is the invisible creator God, and he so wanted to have a relationship with you, so wanted for you to be able to know him, that he chooses to make himself visible. He chooses to draw close. He chooses to make himself known through Jesus. Jesus makes the invisible God visible. When you look at Jesus, you see God the Father. When you look at Jesus, his love is God's love. His truth is God's truth. His forgiveness is God's forgiveness. If you want to know what God is like, then look at Jesus. And if you're still trying to work things out when it comes to faith, if you're not really sure what it is that you believe, begin with Jesus. Start with Jesus. Look at Jesus. Because everything that we can know about who God is found in Jesus. But that means all of Jesus. The things he says and that he does that we're drawn to and that we like, and we look around and say, yeah, I'd like a bit of that. And the things that we might look at and wrestle with and find a little bit more difficult and struggle to make sense of, to see how it fits nicely with all the other things that we want. In all of it, he is making known the invisible God. He is making the invisible God visible to us. And so there is no place for us to pick and choose. Paul goes on then and he says this, "For in him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities. All things have been created by him and for him." Now, this is an amazing statement that is packed full of so much, but I just want to simplify it down to a couple of things. Jesus created all things. Everything that we see, the beauty, the creation, the color, the kind of the grandeur of the mountains and the peacefulness of the lakes, the birds and the animals, the stars all across the sky. One of the things is we've had a lot of over the last kind of couple of weeks or so is we've had a lot of sun, haven't we? And the sunshine's been amazing, but it's been powerful, hasn't it? If I'm out there and I'm not wearing a cap, I find myself squinting or having to kind of put my hand over my eyes to kind of see people or to look at different things. And isn't it incredible that the sun that we have to shield our eyes from is 93 million miles away? That this sun that causes us to sweat because we're so hot is 93 million miles away. And it's 1 million times the size of the planet that we find ourselves on. It is so big, it is so powerful that I find it hard to even begin to get my head around, to imagine. And if that's not hard enough to get your head around, you then try and put that into the scale of the whole universe and how it's just one of billions of stars, and actually it's a pretty small one at that. And Jesus created it all. In fact, Psalm 33 verse 6 says this, "By the word of the Lord the heavens were made, and by the breath of his mouth all the starry host." The sun that is so powerful and impacts on our life every day, the stars that fill the sky at night, they were all brought into being simply by the breath of Jesus. What does that begin to tell you about who Jesus is? If I struggle to get my head around the power and the size of the sun, how can I begin to get my head around how mighty and powerful Jesus is, who simply breathed it into being? And then I love the little phrase that Paul uses just after this when he says, all things have been created not only by him, but for him. That the whole of creation exists for Jesus. Now, here's where this kind of starts to hit home for me in lots of ways. Each one of you are part of God's creation. That means that you were created by Jesus and for Jesus. Just let that sink in for a moment. You were created by Jesus and for Jesus. Two questions that people often come back to are, who am I? What's my identity? Or the second one is why am I here? What's my purpose? And we get the answer to both of those deep questions that we ask right in this verse. Let me pick on someone for a moment. Colin, you're sat at the front, mate. I'm sorry. It's going to be you. I love you, buddy. But Colin, you were created by Jesus. Do you know what that means, mate? That means that your life matters. It means that you were created by Jesus. It means that you were made on purpose, that he chose for you to be here, chose for you to exist. It means that you're not an accident. It means that you are a unique, precious, valuable, supernatural creation of Jesus. And that you are loved and you are of great value because of him. That's who you are. It's that answer to that question of what's my identity. But you know, Colin, you were also created for Jesus. That means that your life counts. That means that every moment that you have, every moment of time, not one bit of it is pointless. Not one bit of it goes kind of unseen by God. You exist for a purpose that is bigger than yourself. Your purpose is to know God. Your purpose is to be in relationship with him. Your purpose is to honor him and to worship him with your life, to put him on display in all that you do. I'll stop picking on Colin. But you know, this is the case for every single one of us. You were created by Jesus and for Jesus. You are of great value. Your life matters. It counts for something. You know, whatever your gifts or abilities or talents, whatever the job is that you do, you have a purpose that is bigger than yourself. That you would honor him. And here's the thing. What I've learned, lots of you will know, I do bits of DIY and all that kind of thing, but it's not something I'm great at. But what I've learned with different tools and different things that I've tried to do, and so often because I don't do lots of DIY, I don't really have the right tool for the job, and so I try and make a tool do something that it's not really designed for. And anyone who's ever done that will know that when you try and use something for a purpose that it was not created for, it rarely does the job well, and it often gets damaged in the process. And I believe this is equally true for you and for me. When we try and do life on our own and live for a different purpose, for a purpose that we were not made for, when we want to live for our own thing and choose the different things that we want to be about, it leads to us getting damaged. To hurt and rejection and disappointment and regret. And this can be the case in so many ways. Whether you try and find yourself living for your career and success in that way, whether you find yourself kind of living for just kind of escapism and fun and entertainment and pleasure, whether you find yourself living for your relationships and your family and people that you know, thinking that that's what you need. If you just had that relationship, it would fix stuff. When the reality is that you were made to live for Jesus. That is your purpose. And it's when you, as with any kind of tool, when you kind of find yourself fulfilling your purpose, doing the job that you were made for, that's when things all kind of fit into place, when life starts to make sense, when you find satisfaction and fulfillment and joy and peace. Every person on this planet, whether they realize it or not, was created by Jesus and for Jesus. Paul then makes this amazing statement. He says, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Now, I love this, because this makes it clear that Jesus didn't just kind of breathe the world into being and then just kind of say, right, I'll leave you to it now. You can make a mess of things if you want. I've got no interest. You just get on with life. It shows us that he is actively involved. Right in this moment, he is involved in the whole of creation, holding it together, holding you together, sustaining everything that he has made. And even science kind of points us to this in some kind of different ways. You see, as far as science understands things, and I'm not a scientist, but this is kind of my understanding of stuff as I've kind of read and looked at different things. But as far as science understands things, matter, the physical things, the smallest thing it can be broken down to is an atom. And in the middle of an atom is a nucleus. And inside the nucleus are some protons and neutrons. And the protons have a positive charge, so kind of an electrical charge that's positive. And the neutrons, as the name kind of suggests, they're neutral. They don't have any charge at all. Now, it's been a long time since I did this, but I remember in school playing with magnets. And I remember playing with magnets in school. And if you put the two sides together, they'd kind of clunk together. But if you flipped it around so that you kind of had a negative against a negative or a positive against a positive, you couldn't do it, could you? The magnets pushed one another apart. There was this force that was there, repelling one another. And this is what is kind of going on inside every atom that exists in the whole of creation. There is protons, which have a positive charge, neutrons which have no charge, and so scientifically, the way that it works, it shouldn't happen. They should fly apart. They should push each other apart. They should self-destruct. And no one really understands why they don't. They don't understand it. And so in the 1920s and the 1930s, scientists, as they kind of found this, they basically said, well, why doesn't it? Well, there must be this force which is holding them together, which they call the strong nuclear force. You can see what that's led to. This strong nuclear force holding everything together, but they don't know why. They don't know how. They don't understand it in any way, but it's there. Now, I'm not trying to say that that's the direct hand of God at work, but it gives us the most amazing picture of how God is at work. The most amazing picture of how there is this strong force holding everything in creation together, holding you together. When it all looks like and it all feels like in your life it should be falling apart. There may be times when you look at the things that are going on and that's how you feel. Things that you're struggling with or challenged with or wrestling with, and you're just feeling like you can't cope with it, and it feels like everything should be falling apart. But I want you to know today that God is actively at work in your life, holding you together. You are in his hands today. We sang in one of the songs earlier, didn't we, about how God is holding the world together in his hands. So I want to encourage you just to come to Jesus today, to look to Jesus today in those areas, in those times, in those places where you feel like you're falling apart, to trust them into him, to say, God, I don't have to try and pull myself together. I can allow everything that is going on and bring it to you, and knowing that you are the one who holds me together. With you, maybe it's in a marriage or in a relationship and you feel like it's falling apart, bring it to Jesus and let him hold you together. Whatever circumstance, whatever situation, when things get tough, you don't have to try and face it alone. God is at work. Jesus is at work. He is actively involved in your life, sustaining and holding you together. Trust him and let him hold you. What we've already learned from what Paul said is mind-blowing, but he doesn't even stop there. He's not finished yet. He goes on and he says this. Christ is also the head of the church, which is his body. He is the beginning, supreme over all who rise from the dead. So he is first in everything. Let's just kind of follow the train of Paul's thought so far. He's saying Jesus is God himself. All things have been created by him and for him. He is the one that our very life depends on. If he wasn't holding us together, we would literally fly apart. He's the one who sustains every moment of your existence. And then Paul says this. He's the head of the church, which is his body, which simply means he's in charge. He's the one who leads, who guides, who directs, who makes the decisions we follow. And then Paul says, all of these things that I've kind of laid out, they make it clear that Jesus is first in everything. Essentially, that in your life and in my life, Jesus would come first. In fact, I'm not even sure that quite goes far enough. When we use that kind of language, and it's hard to know what other language to use, but when we use that kind of language, it leaves us with this idea that Jesus is one of the things on our list of things in our lives that we get to choose where he goes on our priority list. And we know that the aim is that he's top priority, but we kind of have this choice where it is that he goes, and sometimes he is, sometimes he isn't, and that's kind of where it leaves us kind of thinking. But when we get who Jesus is, when we realize who Jesus really is, Paul doesn't say to us that because of all of this, we should put Jesus first, we should make Jesus first in everything, like we've got some kind of choice. Paul says when you get who Jesus is, you realize that he just is first in everything. And you've got a choice whether you line up with that or not. It's not enough for Jesus merely to be an important commitment in your life. It's a starting point. But once we really grasp who Jesus is, he becomes the reason why we exist. The one our whole lives center around. He is first in everything. And here's what I've seen in my own life. When something becomes first, when something becomes what I'm living for, what I'm finding purpose in, I always make a way to make it fit. When you really want something, what do? You sit down, whether it's on your own or it's with your family, and you say, we can do this. It might mean that we're going to have to make some changes in the way that we do life and in what it is that we do, but we can do this. It might not be easy, but this is important. So if we've got to cut back a little bit there and save some money there, then we'll be able to afford it. Or if we stop doing this or going to that, then we'll make time for it. When something becomes of first importance, we always make a way. We never ask the question. We never think, well, how can I possibly fit that in after I've done all of these other things? We make sure that thing is factored in first. And this is really what it looks like for Jesus to be first in everything. Let's think about it another way. Have you ever had people, and maybe some of you have, and if you have, then don't put your hands up, but if you ever had people who you've invited round for dinner and you served them leftovers from the day before? That morning's cold bacon, or the limp fries, the limp chips that you had left from McDonald's. Can you imagine how your guest would feel? They'd be pretty insulted, wouldn't they? And in the same way, when it comes to your life, Jesus wants more than your leftovers. So much more than the leftovers of your time that you feel you can afford to give him after you've done all the things that you really want to do. And that's the way that without meaning to, we can so often approach things. We ask, what can I afford to give to Jesus while still being able to do the things that matter to me, the other things that are important to me? What can I give of my time or my talents or my treasure without it costing the things that I want more? Jesus does not deserve your leftovers. He is God himself. You were made by him and for him. And he is the one who is holding you together. He deserves to be first in everything. I've thrown a lot of different things at you, and I want to make space for you to process a little bit. Just a couple of minutes to reflect and to think about this, because sometimes we can get hit by stuff and we move on so fast that it gets lost. So I've got a few questions just to help you. And you might have one already, which is great, lots of you will. But if you've not, we've got some journals on the welcome table at the back. Grab one of those. They're free. They're available. And we just want to find a way to give a tool into your hands to help you not just to hear God's word, but to engage with it and to be changed by it. And so here are a few questions you can engage with. Put some music on in a second just as you reflect on these. But number one, how does your picture of Jesus compare with this one, with what Paul says? Number 2, is there anything that you need to trust to Jesus, knowing that he is the one who's holding you together? Number 3, what gets your first and your best in this life? You know, how you use your time, your talents, your resources. And then number 4, is there anything that Jesus is prompting you to change? So I'm going to give you a couple of minutes. We'll put some music on. Just take time to pray. Invite the Holy Spirit to come and speak to you, and just reflect on these things. I want to encourage you to just keep coming back to these. They're big questions. And maybe take a few minutes each day through this week to come back to Colossians 1 and to read again kind of Paul's picture that he paints of Jesus. And just to kind of remind yourself who he is, and then ask yourself, have you put him in his rightful place? Have you put him first? And you know, there are times when, if we're honest, we all don't. And we've got to be real about that. You know, I know there are times in my life when I definitely don't, when other things kind of come along and crowd him out. And, in the big picture, yeah, he's there and he's first, but in the minutiae, in the day, I've lost sight of him. And so other stuff is going on, and I catch myself kind of prioritizing and living for other things. And it's in those times that I'm so grateful for what Paul writes next. He says this: "For God was pleased to have all his fullness dwell in him, and through him to reconcile to himself all things, whether things on earth or things in heaven, by making peace through his blood shed on the cross. Once you were alienated from God, you were his enemies, separated from him by your evil thoughts and actions. But now he has reconciled you by Christ's physical body through death to present you holy in his sight, without blemish and free from accusation." Are they beautiful words? Words that all of us need to hear. Just to help this kind of make a little bit of sense, how many of you have ever had a difficult relationship with someone? I mean, we probably all have in different ways, haven't we? Someone's upset you, or they've offended you, or they've mistreated you, they've broken trust, and yet you kind of still have to stay in contact with them. But it's kind of this relationship where, I don't know, you're in their life, but you feel alienated from them, in the way that Paul puts it. Your relationship is strained, you're at odds with one another. You feel kind of distant from each other, and you don't know how to bridge the gap. And I think that's a really helpful image. It's not the full image, but it's a helpful image that captures something of what it is that's going on in our relationship with God. When we choose to do life on our own and to kind of our own way, when we enter that pick and choose of saying what I want rather than coming to him, trust is broken. We upset and offend him. We mistreat him, and it leads to a brokenness in our relationship, a separation, an alienation, a distance between us and him. And we don't have any way to bridge the gap. We need to be reconciled with God for our relationship to be restored. It's not that he's not around. It's not that he's not involved in our lives, because he is. He always is. But the relationship is broken. And this is why God chose to have all his fullness dwell in Christ, in Jesus, to draw close to us and make himself known to us, to make the invisible God visible in Jesus. This is why Jesus willingly went to the cross, allowed his body to be beaten and his blood to be shed. He paid the price for all of the things that we have ever done, or ever thought, or ever failed to do, that has caused brokenness in our relationship with him, in our relationship with God. And because of that, he made a way to bridge the gap. He made a way for us to be reconciled to him, to be forgiven and made new. Not in that place, when you've kind of fallen out with someone and you kind of begin to bridge the gap, but you kind of got to feel like you've got to tread on eggshells and take things carefully, and you're still trying to make up for what it is that you did wrong. Not like that. No. He comes, and because of Jesus, Paul says we're free from guilt and shame. We're free from the past. We're free from accusation and all of those things, every bit of blemish. God looks at us and he sees us and he loves us and he sees us as his children, and he says, you're holy and dearly loved. You're without blemish. You're without fault. And so we can come to him with boldness and with joy, knowing that he receives us with open arms, not because of who we are, but because of what Jesus has done. Jesus is the one who turns us from being alienated with God, from being God's enemies into being God's family, to being his children, to being dearly loved. And none of us deserves it, but Jesus makes this forgiveness, he makes this reconciliation and relationship with God available to all of us. To all who would come to him and recognize who he is. The King of Kings and the Lord of Lords. Our Creator and our Sustainer, the one who holds us together, the one who died in our place and rose again so that we could be reconciled to God. Our Savior and our hope. And to all who will come and make him king, he says, freely receive my forgiveness. Freely receive a restored relationship with God. Freely receive new life, not only now, but for eternity. Not because of us and what we deserve, but because of him and what he's done. This is Jesus.